Imagine a world rising from marshes and reed-filled rivers, a place where the Tigris and Euphrates cut their winding paths through endless wetlands, carving a stage for one of humanity's first great civilizations. Sit back, relax, and let yourself drift into the echoes of a land that existed more than 6,000 years ago, where the boundaries between myth and memory blur into the first whispers of history. This is Sumer, a place of mud-brick cities, where the air was thick with the scent of river silt and freshly baked clay, and the hum of laboring hands, the call of merchants, and the distant toll of ritual drums filled every dawn. It is here, amid this watery labyrinth, that humans first began to shape society on an unprecedented scale. Some researchers believe that the Sumerians emerged gradually, a collection of diverse peoples drawn to these fertile lands by the promise of abundant crops and rich clay for building, while others suggest a more sudden, almost mysterious appearance of a fully formed urban culture, as if civilization itself had been whispered into being by unseen forces. Their cities, from Eridu to Uruk, stretched like islands of human order in a sea of marshland, their streets alive with the clatter of carts and the voices of artisans and scribes. Imagine the texture of the mud bricks in your fingers, sun-baked and warm, the intricate carvings on temple walls capturing the light in sharp relief, the monumental ziggurats rising like stone mountains, their shadows stretching across the city in the morning sun. It was a world simultaneously fragile and monumental, where survival demanded ingenuity, yet ambition reached for the heavens. And yet, the story of the Sumerians is not just a story of construction and conquest. It is a story of language, of writing, of the first attempts to capture thought itself in lasting form. Cuneiform would etch into clay the hopes, fears, and calculations of countless lives, creating a bridge across millennia that still speaks to us today. But how did this civilization, so advanced and so human, rise from the quiet marshes without leaving any precursor we can fully trace? Some whisper of migrations, of climate shifts, of unknown catalysts that sparked urban life here first. As the rivers twisted and shimmered under the early sun, humanity was quietly awakening to its own potential, building a world that would echo across history long after the waters had shifted and the mud had hardened into memory. And in the distance, beneath the hum of city life, a question lingered, subtle yet persistent. What secrets lay buried beneath these first streets, waiting for the patient eyes of those who would look thousands of years later? The story of Sumer is not merely one of cities and rivers. It is the story of people learning to bend their environment to their will, of human ingenuity carving order from chaos. Picture the vast floodplains where the Tigris and Euphrates could swell suddenly, swallowing fields and homes, leaving behind rich silt and the constant hum of uncertainty. It was here that the Sumerians first experimented with irrigation, channeling water through networks of canals that glistened under the sun like veins of liquid silver, bringing life to fields that would otherwise have been barren. Some scholars suggest that these early engineers were inspired by careful observation. Others believe necessity forced rapid innovation in a place where survival depended on control over water. Imagine the texture of damp mud underfoot as workers shaped dikes and levees, the smell of wet clay mingling with the river's own temps, the repetitive rhythm of hands moving earth, of buckets raised and lowered, creating not just crops but a system, a civilization in miniature. Alongside agriculture, craft and trade began to flourish. Artisans shaped pottery on wheels that spun with a hypnotic hum, created jewelry that caught the sun in tiny flickers, and hammered bronze tools that would be prized across the region. Researchers note that these objects were more than practical. They carried meaning, identity, and status, and their designs echoed across generations. Trade routes, initially small and precarious, began to stitch Sumer together with distant regions, bringing lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, copper from Anatolia, and timber from faraway mountains. Each traded object was a thread in a growing tapestry of interconnection, evidence that the Sumerians were not isolated farmers, but pioneers of complex society. And in the midst of all this, the first cities began to take shape, rising in careful, deliberate layers. Uruk, Eridu, Lagash Nainsta would resonate through time, grew from clusters of houses into monumental centers of administration, religion, and commerce. Yet, even as these urban landscapes expanded, the Sumerians faced questions that would define their culture: how to govern, how to preserve knowledge, how to record human experience. It is in this crucible that writing emerged, not as art, but as necessity. The sharp impressions of cuneiform on clay were the first attempts to capture the fleeting, to make human thought permanent, to reach across generations. And as the stylus pressed into the wet clay, leaving lines that would endure for thousands of years, one cannot help but wonder, who were the first scribes, and what did they think as they traced the beginnings of human history itself? As we drift deeper into the world of the Sumerians, imagine the city of Uruk at its height, a sprawling labyrinth of mud brick streets, bustling markets, and towering walls that seemed to scrape the sky. The air would have been thick with the scent of baked clay, livestock, and the river's humid breath, mingling with the distant clang of metal workers shaping bronze and the rhythmic chant of laborers shaping bricks under the relentless sun. Scholars suggest that Uruk was not just a city, but a statement, a declaration of human ambition, a place where power, faith, and knowledge intertwined in ways that had never been seen before. Here, the first monumental architecture began to rise: the ziggurats, step pyramids of baked mud that reached toward the heavens, their surfaces gleaming in the sun by day and silhouetted against the stars at night. Some researchers believe that these structures were built to bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine, a physical manifestation of a society grappling with its own place in the cosmos. Imagine the thousands of laborers moving massive mud bricks, each step coordinated, each action part of a grand design that required not just strength, but precise organization. The kind that only an emergent bureaucracy could achieve. Within these cities, a new social order was taking shape. Priests wielded spiritual authority, rulers asserted political power, and scribes held the keys to knowledge, their styluses pressing symbols into clay that would survive millennia. Others suggest that the first kings were less rulers than organizers, masters of a delicate balance between competing interests, their legitimacy tied not to conquest alone, but to their ability to maintain harmony between humans and the gods. And yet, life in Uruk was not solely monumental or ceremonial. It was lived in the small details: children learning songs and stories, merchants haggling over barley, artisans perfecting the subtle curves of a jar or the glint of a bronze blade. Archaeological discoveries of thousands of cuneiform tablets hint at both the mundane and the profound. Inventories of grain, records of trade, contracts, and even the earliest myths like the tales of Inanna and Gilgamesh, narratives that carried the hopes, fears, and values of a civilization striving to understand itself. The interplay between daily life and monumental ambition raises an enduring question. How did a people so concerned with survival also cultivate such intricate systems of religion, law, and literature, laying the foundations for civilization itself? And as we contemplate this, the river continues to flow, carrying both silt and secrets, whispering stories that even now, thousands of years later, we are only beginning to understand. Picture, if you will, the dawn over the marshy plains of southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates converge in a tangled network of canals, reeds, and shallow lagoons. It is here, some researchers believe, that the Sumerians first took root, carving settlements from the stubborn earth, taming waters that could just as easily destroy as sustain. The landscape itself demanded innovation. Seasonal floods could wipe away entire villages, yet the Sumerians responded with canals, dikes, and reservoirs, reshaping the environment to their needs. Imagine the labor, the ingenuity, the precision required to divert rivers and control irrigation on a scale previously unseen, a feat that speaks to both desperation and brilliance. Archaeological surveys reveal intricate water management systems, evidence of communities that coordinated, not only for survival, but for growth, enabling a population to thrive where survival should have been precarious. Some theorists suggest that these engineering marvels were the earliest forms of organized governance, the ancestors of bureaucracy, where labor, resources, and knowledge were marshaled with near-military precision. Alongside the canals rose the first urban grids, straight streets lined with tightly packed homes, workshops, and temples, each city a microcosm of order imposed upon nature's chaos. Here, in the shadow of massive ziggurats, the first scribes honed their craft, pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay, creating cuneiform symbols that recorded not only grain shipments and trade deals, but also the myths and laws that would define their civilization for millennia. Others suggest that writing itself was born from necessity, a way to keep the delicate balance of urban life in check, to ensure that promises made in the marketplace could be enforced, that temple offerings were accounted for, that the rhythm of daily life did not collapse into chaos. And yet, within this ordered world, culture flourished. Music, poetry, ritual, and storytelling intertwined with administration, creating layers of experience that were at once practical and transcendent. Imagine the first audiences listening to epic tales of gods and heroes, their eyes fixed on flickering oil lamps, absorbing lessons about morality, power, and mortality. Perhaps unaware that these narratives would echo through millennia, the question lingers: how did a people so intimately tied to survival cultivate such profound sophistication, blending engineering, governance, and imagination into a civilization whose shadows reach us even today? And as the sun sets over these marshlands, the canals glint like silver veins, silently bearing the secrets of a people whose ingenuity would outlast their own names. Now, close your eyes and imagine the bustling streets of Uruk, one of the earliest Sumerian city-states, alive with the sounds of merchants calling out their wares, the clatter of carts over clay-paved roads, and the distant hum of chants rising from temple precincts. The scale of these cities astounds even modern observers. Walls thick enough to withstand siege, gates adorned with carved reliefs, and neighborhoods arranged with a precision that suggests not just planning but vision, a deliberate assertion of order over chaos. Some researchers believe that Uruk's rapid expansion, around 4000 to 3000 BCE, was fueled by a combination of agricultural surpluses, trade networks stretching to the Persian Gulf, and innovative administrative systems, all made possible by cuneiform record-keeping. The city was a living organism, each district interdependent, each temple acting as both spiritual center and economic hub, storing grain, organizing labor, and maintaining irrigation canals that stretched far beyond the city walls. Imagine walking through these precincts and noticing the smells of baked bread, wet clay, and oil lamps mixing with the crispness of early morning air over the Euphrates. The temples, often built atop monumental platforms we now call ziggurats, towered over the city, their steep stairways and monumental facades intended to bridge heaven and earth, to reflect the cosmic order that the Sumerians sought to impose, not just on their city, but on the universe itself. Others suggest that these ziggurats were also practical. Elevated platforms protected sacred spaces from seasonal flooding, a marriage of spirituality and engineering that defined Sumerian ingenuity. Within these walls, scribes meticulously recorded offerings, trade agreements, and royal decrees, creating tablets that would survive thousands of years, long after the city itself had crumbled to dust. And yet, despite this sophistication, the Sumerians lived in a world of uncertainty, unpredictable floods, intercity conflicts, and the ever-present threat of famine. The tension between human ambition and nature's caprice infused daily life, with a rhythm both urgent and fragile, shaping the psyche of a civilization attuned to cycles of risk and reward. As you imagine these streets fading into twilight, you might wonder, what drove the Sumerians to codify laws, preserve stories, and engineer monumental cities in a landscape so unforgiving? The answer, perhaps, lies not only in survival, but in a deeper human impulse to leave a mark, a testament to intelligence, culture, and resilience that time itself cannot erase. Picture now the intricate dance of Sumerian society, where every individual, from the laborer tending the canals to the high priest chanting in the temple, played a role in a system that was both rigid and astonishingly sophisticated. The Sumerians were masters of adaptation, shaping the marshy, unpredictable landscape between the Tigris and Euphrates into fertile fields that could sustain a dense population. Their irrigation systems were marvels of engineering, canals cutting through clay and silt sluices regulating water flow, and reservoirs holding precious water through scorching summers. Some researchers believe that these networks were managed by complex bureaucracies that kept meticulous records on clay tablets, detailing who worked which fields, how much grain was harvested, and how it should be distributed or stored. Imagine walking alongside these canals and hearing the gentle rush of water, feeling the cool mist against sun-warmed skin, watching farmers guide plows pulled by oxen through glistening soil. The rhythm of labor harmonized with the ebb and flow of the rivers. Others suggest that this intimate knowledge of water management gave the Sumerians not just agricultural stability, but a form of social control, a way to organize labor, resources, and allegiance across a growing urban population. Their mastery extended beyond water. Metallurgy allowed the creation of bronze tools and weapons. The potter's wheel refined craft production, and the earliest forms of mathematics and astronomy enabled them to plan construction, track celestial movements, and regulate calendars for both agriculture and religious observance. Step inside a scribal school, and you would see young students pressing styluses into wet clay, copying lists, hymns, and legal codes, their fingers smudged with clay, their voices murmuring the strange, lyrical cadences of the Sumerian language, tongue already ancient, yet vital, alive with memory and ritual. These schools were more than classrooms. They were incubators of knowledge, cultural memory, and identity, creating generations of scholars capable of maintaining continuity through centuries of change. And yet, as monumental as these achievements were, Sumerian cities were never isolated. They were part of a broader network of city-states, often in conflict, trading, and exchanging ideas, their destinies entwined. The question lingers, echoing across the clay and brick of these ancient streets. How did a civilization so fragile, so bound to the caprices of rivers and sand, create structures, systems, and knowledge so enduring that echoes of their ingenuity still resonate millennia later? Now imagine the temples rising from the flat sun-baked plains, ziggurats of mud brick reaching skyward like stepped mountains, their surfaces catching the golden light of dawn, their shadows stretching long across the bustling city below. These were not merely places of worship, but centers of administration, education, and commerce, where the hum of human activity intertwined with the solemnity of ritual. Priests moved through shadowed corridors, their robes whispering against the rough stone floors, offering prayers, making sacrifices, and recording transactions with stylus on clay. Some researchers suggest that these religious centers were the backbone of Sumerian literacy, repositories where thousands of clay tablaslars, hymns, astronomical records were painstakingly inscribed and carefully stored. Others propose that the temples acted as stabilizing forces, preserving knowledge and culture through periods of political upheaval, invasions, and dynastic change, ensuring continuity even when kings rose and fell. Imagine entering a scriptorium, the air thick with dust and the faint aroma of baked clay, where scribes worked under the dim glow of oil lamps, the scratch of stylus against tableau a constant, rhythmic companion. Here, the Sumerian language persisted long after its spoken form waned, maintained not only for ritual but as a badge of intellectual and cultural identity, bridging the past and the present. Archaeological discoveries suggest that these institutions did more than record. They taught, debated, and innovated, producing bilingual scholars fluent in Sumerian and Akkadian, capable of navigating both the sacred and administrative worlds. Outside the temple walls, markets thrived, merchants bargaining over textiles, grains, and crafted goods, the clatter of pottery and the bray of donkeys filling the streets, all under the watchful eyes of temple officials, ensuring order and fairness. Yet, this blend of spiritual authority, administrative control, and cultural preservation created both resilience and vulnerability. Each city-state was a microcosm of civilization itself, balancing human ambition with environmental limits, the sacred with the practical. The question that haunts the clay and mud of these ancient cities is this: how did the Sumerians, a people confined to a narrow strip of land between two capricious rivers, create a civilization whose reach, influence, and ingenuity would echo through millennia, touching distant lands and shaping the very fabric of human history? As we move beyond the towering ziggurats and echoing halls of Sumerian temples, picture the intricate network of canals and irrigation channels that carved life into the arid plains between the Tigris and Euphrates. Water was not just a necessity. It was power, the lifeblood of cities, the thread connecting fields to markets, rulers to subjects, and humans to the capricious forces of nature. Some scholars believe that the precise engineering of these canals, sluices and reservoirs was a product of centuries of observation, trial and collaboration, each brick and embankment a testament to human ingenuity. Others suggest that the Sumerians may have drawn inspiration from the rhythms of the rivers themselves, studying floods and droughts, tides and silt, turning environmental uncertainty into predictable patterns that could support growing populations. Imagine the soundscape, the constant gurgle of water flowing through clay channels, the occasional shout of farmers tending crops, the metallic clang of tools adjusting gates or repairing breaches. These irrigation systems were more than agricultural. They were administrative triumphs, demanding record-keeping, labor coordination, and meticulous planning. Clay tablets found in the ruins reveal detailed accounts of water allocation, crop yields, and labor obligations, illustrating an early form of bureaucratic governance that underpinned the Sumerian economy. Beyond feeding the people, these canals facilitated trade and transport, allowing boats laden with barley, textiles, and crafted goods to glide through the city like veins carrying wealth and culture. But the rivers could be both friend and foe. Unpredictable floods could erase entire harvests, reminding the Sumerians of their fragile position between human ambition and natural forces. In this delicate balance, the Sumerians honed skills that would influence engineering for millennia. Dam construction, canal design, and soil management that sustained civilization against environmental extremes. Yet, with all this coordination and planning, the question lingers. Could a society so dependent on fragile networks of water, labor, and knowledge withstand the pressures of invasions, dynastic collapse, and cultural transformation, or would the very systems that gave life also become the instruments of vulnerability? Now, imagine the bustling streets of Uruk, or you're at the height of Sumerian ingenuity, where every stone, every brick, every carefully carved doorway carries the weight of centuries of knowledge and ambition. The urban planning of these early cities was not haphazard. It was a deliberate orchestration of human activity, an intricate dance between domestic life, commerce, administration, and religious devotion. Some researchers suggest that the Sumerians developed zoning systems, separating residential quarters from marketplaces, workshops, and temple precincts, while others believe that the organic growth of neighborhoods reflected social hierarchies and occupational clusters rather than rigid planning. Walk through these streets in your mind and hear the cacophony: merchants haggling over grain, artisans hammering bronze, priests chanting from temple steps, the smell of freshly baked bread, mingling with the earthy aroma of clay and mud. The infrastructure was astounding: clay brick streets engineered to drain rainwater, sophisticated sewage channels beneath houses, wells, and cisterns providing fresh water to entire neighborhoods. At the center of the city, the ziggurat loomed. Like a cosmic axis, its step terraces, a constant reminder of divine presence and human aspiration. Beyond spiritual symbolism, these monumental structures required logistical mastery: stone and mud bricks transported across rivers and fields, laborers coordinated with a precision that rivals modern construction projects. Some scholars propose that this architectural consistency across cities indicates a shared knowledge system, perhaps transmitted through scribal schools and temple workshops. Others argue that the variations reveal the subtle hand of local rulers, imprinting identity and authority onto urban landscapes. But even amid order, there was chaos, floods, political upheaval, and rivalry between city-states constantly tested these carefully designed systems. The evidence suggests that Sumerian urban planning was not merely functional. It was a statement of power, a declaration that humans could shape their environment, impose order on nature, and build communities that could endure beyond individual lifespans. Yet, one must wonder, in these early cities, where every canal, street, and ziggurat reflected human ingenuity, what unseen tensions simmered beneath the surface, ready to unravel the delicate balance of civilization itself. As we drift further into the world of the Sumerians, imagine the fertile yet perilous lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, where the marshy floodplains could nurture crops or swallow them whole with the next unpredictable inundation. Here, the Sumerians became master engineers, coaxing water from the rivers into elaborate canal networks that stretched for miles, feeding fields of barley, wheat, and flax. Some researchers suggest these canals were meticulously surveyed using rudimentary geometry, their gradients calculated to maintain steady flow, while others argue that trial and error guided the expansion of these irrigation systems over generations. Picture the labor. Thousands of hands digging, shaping, reinforcing earthen walls, mud-streaked faces glistening under the scorching sun, the rhythmic sound of shovels clinking and water rushing through channels echoing across the plains. These irrigation projects were more than agriculture. They were instruments of social cohesion, requiring organization, coordination, and record-keeping that laid the foundations for bureaucratic administration. Clay tokens, an early cuneiform. Tablets show accounts of grain allocation, labor contributions, and maintenance schedules, hinting at the early emergence of governance intertwined with technology. Beyond sustenance, the canals became arteries of trade, connecting cities, enabling boats laden with pottery, timber, and textiles to glide along slow-moving waters, carrying not just goods but ideas, myths, and religious practices from one city-state to another. Yet the reliance on such engineered landscapes also made the Sumerians vulnerable. Floods could destroy harvests, silt could choke canals. Rival city-states could sabotage water flow in times of conflict, and the delicate balance of cooperation and enforcement could unravel. Some scholars suggest that this constant tension between creation and destruction shaped not only Sumerian society but also their worldview, influencing myths that depicted capricious gods controlling rivers, skies, and seasons. Others propose that their careful observations of water, celestial cycles, and seasonal patterns fed directly into their mathematics, astronomy, and calendar systems, bridging the practical with the spiritual. And so, as we follow the winding canals across the land, we see a civilization simultaneously mastering and fearing nature, a society that thrived through ingenuity yet remained perpetually at the mercy of forces larger than themselves. But one question lingers, soft yet insistent. Could a people so dependent on controlled water ever truly conquer the chaos of the rivers? Or was their very survival always poised on the edge of catastrophe? Now, sit back and imagine the cities themselves, rising from the mudflats like islands of order in a sea of reeds and marsh. Uluk, your Lagashnanes that still echo through history, were not merely settlements, but living, breathing hubs of complexity, teeming with thousands of souls, navigating narrow streets, paved with mud bricks, lined with towering walls, and punctuated by the shadow of immense ziggurats. These stepped temples, monumental in scale, dominated the skyline. Their sun-baked bricks, glowing gold at dawn and crimson at dusk, reaching upward as if to pierce the heavens themselves. Some researchers believe that these ziggurats were not only religious centers, but also administrative nerve centers, repositories of knowledge, and symbols of a city's political power, while others argue that their primary function was purely ceremonial, a stage 4 ritual drama connecting the earthly and divine. Imagine the smells, the acrid smoke of clay kilns, the sweetness of baking bread, the metallic Thames of bronze being forged in workshops, the rich scent of wet mud after a river surge. The hum of life was constant, merchants shouting prices, scribes scratching marks into soft clay tablets, children chasing each other through dusty lanes, priests chanting invocations to unseen gods. The cities were designed with astonishing foresight, residential quarters nestled near workshops, marketplaces organized along main arteries, canals feeding water directly to homes and fields, and defensive walls standing firm against the unpredictable threats from both nature and human rivals. And yet, despite this apparent mastery, urban life was fragile. Disease, famine, and conflict could sweep through with terrifying speed, and the political unity of each city was perpetually precarious, held together by the delicate balance of religion, trade, and force. Archaeological evidence shows that Sumerians used clay tablets not only to record commerce, but also to codify laws, track genealogies, and preserve myths' tiny windows into minds striving to understand themselves, their rulers, and the cosmos. Some of these texts reveal the poetic musings of scribes contemplating mortality and divine will, hinting at a culture deeply reflective despite the harshness of daily life. Others depict meticulous instructions for irrigation, taxation, and temple offerings, showcasing a society equally concerned with survival and legacy. The cities were both sanctuaries and pressure cookers, places of extraordinary innovation yet constant tension. And as night falls across Uruk's rooftops and the stars emerge above the desert horizon, one cannot help but wonder, how did these early urban architects balance ambition and vulnerability, reaching for eternity while knowing the river might erase them in a single flood? As the rivers Tigris and Euphrates carved their slow paths through the plains, they brought both life and danger, shaping Sumerian civilization in ways as subtle as the shifting mud underfoot, and as monumental as the cities themselves. Imagine the vast, interlaced canals, their waters glinting under the harsh Mesopotamian sun, channeling precious liquid to thirsty fields of barley and flax, to orchards of dates, and to the clay-streaked streets where children played. Some scholars suggest that these irrigation systems were the backbone of Sumerian urban growth, a testament to the ingenuity required to tame such a mercurial landscape, while others propose that the canals were a double-edged sword prone to collapse and salinity, testing the limits of human engineering and societal organization. Picture the farmers wading through ankle-deep water, reeds brushing against their legs, carrying baskets of grain, or mending dikes before the river swelled with winter rains. The rhythm of daily life was intimately tied to these waterways, each sluice gate and levee a fragile instrument that could bring prosperity or ruin. Beyond sustenance, the canals defined the political and social landscape, creating networks that linked cities, facilitated trade, and encouraged cooperation and sometimes fierce competition. Sumerian scribes meticulously documented these waterworks, inscribing clay tablets with calculations, schedules, and legal decrees that dictated who could irrigate which field and when, revealing a civilization obsessed with order and foresight. Archaeological digs showed traces of wooden gates, brick-lined channels, and reservoirs, indicating large-scale projects that required centralized planning, labor coordination, and technological know-how that would astound modern engineers. Some researchers believe that the scale and complexity of these systems necessitated the development of proto-bureaucracies, giving rise to powerful elites who controlled water and, by extension, life itself, while others suggest that communal management played an equally crucial role, with ordinary citizens participating in the maintenance and governance of these lifelines. The rivers, however, were unpredictable. Floods could sweep away crops and settlements in hours, leaving layers of silt and debris that archaeologists now study as clues to ancient disasters. Through these cycles of abundance and destruction, the Sumerians honed their ingenuity, inventing not just irrigation but also methods of urban planning, taxation, and risk mitigation. The interplay of water and society created a delicate tension, a civilization capable of great architectural and technological feats, yet constantly reminded of its vulnerability. And as the sun sets behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the glistening canals, one must ask, how much of Sumerian innovation was born of ambition, and how much was a desperate response to the capricious river that both nurtured and threatened their existence? In the bustling streets of early Sumerian cities, the soundscape was a mosaic of life-clattering pottery wheels, the low murmur of merchants haggling over barley and wool, the distant thrum of temple drums calling the faithful to prayer. Some scholars believe that the hum of these cities represented the very heartbeat of civilization itself, while others suggest it masked deeper tensions, the invisible currents of power and ambition that flowed beneath every interaction. Picture the mud-brick homes, tightly packed and coated in sun-baked clay, their rooftops serving as vantage points for watchful elders or spaces for drying reeds and grain. The scent of baked bread mingling with the sharp tinge of river water and livestock. Within these urban landscapes, the Sumerians developed the first complex systems of administration, a network of scribes and officials whose painstaking cuneiform records documented trade, property, and legal matters with astonishing precision. Some researchers argue that writing emerged primarily from practical necessity, a tool for keeping accounts and enforcing contracts, while others propose it evolved as a means to communicate religious and cultural narratives, embedding memory and law into clay itself. Imagine a scribe, stylus in hand, pressing wedge-shaped impressions into soft clay, each mark encoding the rhythms of everyday life, taxes, rations, temple offerings, and, yet simultaneously preserving stories, hymns, and myths that would resonate across millennia. The architectural grandeur of the ziggurats towered above these streets, their stepped forms reflecting both celestial aspirations and earthly authority, centers where religion and governance intertwined. Some suggest that these monumental structures served primarily as religious temples, connecting mortals to the divine, while others argue they were also potent symbols of political power, their sheer scale asserting dominance over the cityscape. Beneath the veneer of order, however, there was an ever-present fragility. Competition for water, arable land, and trade routes sparked tensions between cities, sometimes erupting into full-scale conflict, leaving behind layers of destruction that archaeologists now interpret as both cautionary and instructive. Traders brought goods and ideas from distant regions lapis-lazuli from Afghanistan, timber from the Zagros, and copper from a Marnich artifact, a thread in a web of early globalization that shaped social hierarchies and cultural exchange. Through the daily ebb and flow of markets, workshops, and ceremonial spaces, Sumerians navigated a complex social and economic landscape that demanded adaptability, foresight, and cooperation. And as night falls over the city, lanterns flickering and the distant howl of jackals echoing across the plain, one might wonder, how did this delicate balance of human ingenuity, ambition, and vulnerability set the stage for the Rhazand eventual fold one of history's first great civilizations? Sit back, relax, and imagine the Euphrates and Tigris rivers carving through the sun-scorched plains, their waters carrying not just life, but also the seeds of ambition, conflict, and invention that would define Sumerian society. Some reasons believe that the unpredictable flooding of these rivers demanded sophisticated planning, pushing early communities to develop canals, levees, and reservoirs, transforming the marshy landscape into a cradle of urban civilization. Others suggest that the rivers themselves became more than resources. They were symbols of cosmic order, their rhythms mirrored in religious rituals and agricultural cycles, guiding not only survival but also the philosophical understanding of existence. The canals, meticulously laid and maintained, revealed the Sumerians' advanced grasp of hydraulics and engineering, a testament to coordinated labor and centralized administration. Picture hundreds of workers, their hands raw from mud and water, aligning channels with precision, while overseers mark measurements on clay tablets, calculating volumes and flow rates with numerical systems that would astound later generations. The very tools of agriculture, the plow, the sickle, and the irrigation gates were designed not merely for efficiency but as instruments of social organization, dictating the rhythms of labor, taxation, and trade. Some scholars argue that these technological innovations were the foundation for political authority, allowing rulers to mobilize resources and project power, while others see them as communal achievements that bound citizens together through shared effort and mutual dependence. Beyond the practical, Sumerian ingenuity extended to timekeeping and astronomy, with scholars observing lunar and solar cycles to regulate planting, festivals, and religious ceremonies. Imagine a night sky pierced by stars, each alignment and movement meticulously recorded on clay tablets, interpreted as messages from gods or guides for civic planning. These observations laid the groundwork for mathematics, geometry, and calendrical systems that informed not only agricultural schedules, but also monumental architecture, ritual timing, and administrative precision. In workshops, craftsmen transformed raw materials into tools, vessels, and ornaments, their techniques refined over generations: bronze casting, pottery shaping, and textile weaving producing objects of both utility and beauty. Some researchers believe that these material innovations were directly linked to social hierarchy, signaling wealth, status, and political influence, while others suggest that they reflect cultural values that prize skill, tradition, and aesthetic harmony. And as the sun sets over the flat plains, casting long shadows across mud brick walls and irrigated fields, one might pause to consider, in this fragile balance of nature, ingenuity, and human organization, what forces would ultimately test the endurance of Sumerian civilization and challenge its very survival. Now, close your eyes and picture the cities of Sumer rising from the floodplains like islands of order amid a restless, watery world. Uruk, Lagash, and Eridu, each a bustling hub of human ambition, religion, and commerce. Some historians suggest that the sheer scale of these settlements, with streets bustling with merchants, artisans, and farmers, was unprecedented, creating an environment where social stratification, law, and culture intertwined seamlessly. Others propose that these cities emerged almost organically, their growth guided as much by geography and resources as by conscious planning, their boundaries defined by walls, canals, and sacred precincts. Imagine walking through the narrow, dusty streets, the scent of baked clay mingling with smoke from hearths, the clatter of bronze tools shaping implements and vessels, and the low murmur of market negotiations where grains, textiles, and crafts change hands. Above it all, the towering ziggurats dominate the skyline, their step terraces reaching toward the heavens, serving not only as temples, but as symbols of divine authority and civic pride. Archaeological excavations reveal that these monumental structures were more than religious centers. They functioned as administrative hubs, granaries, and archives, intertwining the sacred and the bureaucratic in ways that structured daily life. Some researchers believe that the ziggurat's alignment with celestial bodies reflects advanced astronomical knowledge, their orientation encoding cosmic order into the very fabric of the city, while others see them as assertions of political legitimacy, demonstrating a ruler's ability to marshal resources and labor. Within these cities, scribes worked tirelessly, recording transactions, legal matters, and literary compositions on clay tablets, preserving knowledge for both practical administration and cultural memory. Imagine the soft scratch of reed styluses, etching symbols into wet clay, a practice that would ultimately preserve the first human stories, myths, and laws for millennia. Trade networks extend outward, connecting Sumer with distant lands, copper from Oman, timber from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Each artifact, a silent witness to the reach and influence of these early urban societies. And yet, despite this apparent sophistication, the cities were fragile ecosystems, vulnerable to droughts, invasions, and political rivalries. Some scholars argue that the competition between city-states fostered innovation and cultural richness, while others see it as a persistent source of instability that would eventually pave the way for external powers to dominate. As night falls over these bustling settlements, lanterns flickering in the warm, dusty streets, one must wonder, how did these first cities balance human ambition, environmental constraints, and divine order? And what legacies of their ingenuity would survive the inevitable tides of conquest and change? As we drift deeper into the story of Sumer, Imagine the canals and irrigation networks stretching like veins across the marshy plains, channeling life-giving water from the Tigris and Euphrates into fields that fed millions. Some researchers believe these intricate systems were the result of centuries of trial and error, perfected through generations of farmers and engineers who understood the delicate balance between flood and drought, while others suggest a more centralized approach, where rulers orchestrated labor to maintain both agricultural productivity and social control. Picture the sound of water sluices creaking, mud walls being reinforced under the hot sun, and the rhythmic pounding of workers shaping the canals, Bunks's symphony of human ingenuity and endurance. These networks were not merely functional. They shaped the very fabric of society, creating hierarchies of labor, administration, and resource allocation. Archaeological surveys reveal evidence of sophisticated flood management and storage facilities, suggesting a civilization acutely aware of environmental pressures and capable of organizing complex, cooperative efforts on an unprecedented scale. Through these innovations, Sumerians supported dense urban populations and enabled specialized crafts, trade, and monumental construction. Some scholars argue that the success of irrigation directly influenced political power, as control over water meant control over life itself, granting rulers both legitimacy and leverage. Others propose that the very act of collective labor in canal construction forged a shared identity, binding disparate communities under the emerging banner of Sumerian culture. Beyond agriculture, the canals facilitated trade, allowing goods to move efficiently between cities and connecting Sumer to distant regions, where raw materials like timber, copper, and precious stones flowed in, and crafted products and textiles flowed out. Imagine merchants navigating shallow boats laden with clay jars, wool, and metalwork, navigating the twisting waterways under the sun's harsh glare, their voices carrying over the water, punctuated by the sound of oars and the occasional bark of a herder managing livestock along the banks. These engineering feats were also intellectual achievements, requiring precise knowledge of geometry, hydraulics, and seasonal cycles, laying the groundwork for mathematical and scientific advancements that would echo through history. And yet, despite their brilliance, these same canals could betray the city's mismanaged floods, or prolonged droughts could devastate harvests, spark social unrest, and invite the encroachment of foreign powers. As you imagine the water reflecting the pink-orange glow of a setting sun, think of the delicate tension between human innovation and nature, between survival and ambition and wonder. How much of Sumer's genius was a response to necessity, and how much was an expression of humanity's earliest desire to bend the world to its will? Now, let us turn our attention to the architectural wonders of Sumer, where mud brick rose from the plains to form cities that seemed to float above the marshes, their walls thick and sun-baked, their streets narrow and winding like the veins of some great living organism. Imagine walking through Uruk or Ur, the smell of wet clay mingling with the scent of baked bread and livestock, the heat radiating off the sun-drenched bricks, while children ran barefoot past workshops where craftsmen hammered bronze tools and shaped pottery on spinning wheels. The most striking feature, of course, were the ziggurat-stepped pyramids that towered over the city, their lofty summits reaching toward the sky, almost as if to bridge the chasm between mortal and divine. Some researchers suggest these structures were designed to impress and intimidate, projecting the power of rulers and priests alike, while others see them as spiritual conduits. Sacred mountains connecting earth and heaven, where ritual, sacrifice, and prayer intertwined. Archaeological evidence reveals complex foundations, baked brick cores, and careful drainage systems, indicating that Sumerians had mastered engineering techniques that allowed these enormous structures to endure floods, heat, and centuries of decay. Imagine climbing the steep terraces, each step resonating with the echoes of processions and chants, passing granaries, storerooms, and small shrines, the sounds of trade and worship merging into a subtle hum of civic life. Beyond the temples, administrative buildings and palaces showcased the ingenuity of urban planning, courtyards and workshops interlinked with roads and canals, residential quarters organized with attention to function and hierarchy, public spaces for commerce and assembly carefully integrated into the city's flow. Scholars suggest that this meticulous organization reflects a deep understanding of social dynamics, resource management, and human behavior, demonstrating that the Sumerians were not only architects of stone and mud, but architects of society itself. The decorative elements, carved reliefs, colorful inlays, and cylinder seals offer glimpses into myth, power, and identity, each detail narrating a story, asserting authority, or invoking divine protection. And yet, even as we marvel at these accomplishments, we must remember the fragility underlying them. Cities dependent on irrigation, political alliances, and the constant vigilance of rulers, vulnerable to conquest, natural disaster, and internal strife. Walking through these ancient streets in your mind, you can almost hear the whispers of past inhabitants, the merchants bargaining, the priests chanting, the laborers working tirelessly under the sun, and you are left to wonder, how did these first urban architects conceive of spaces so enduring? And what secrets did their walls hold that still call to us across millennia? As we drift further into the world of Sumer, let us explore their mastery of water and the lifeblood of their civilization, the intricate irrigation systems that turned the marshy plains between the Tigris and Euphrates into fertile gardens capable of sustaining dense urban populations. Picture canals stretching like veins across the landscape, gates and sluices regulating the flow, small locks and reservoirs storing precious water for the dry months, while fields of barley and wheat glistened under the sun, nourished by this careful engineering. Some researchers believe that the ability to control water was more than mere practice. It was a source of power, a form of governance that required coordination, planning, and labor management, embedding a sense of hierarchy and organization into the very earth itself. Imagine the sound of water rushing through channels, the smell of wet mud mingling with crops, laborers tending the dikes and maintaining the canals, overseen by officials keeping meticulous records on clay tablets, each mark a testament to the careful calculation that allowed these cities to thrive. Archaeological evidence shows that these systems were not static. They evolved over centuries, repaired and expanded, reflecting the ingenuity and adaptability of Sumerian engineers. The scale of these networks suggests coordinated effort on an almost unimaginable level, requiring not only technical skill, but also social cooperation and bureaucratic oversight, laying foundations for administrative systems that would influence every subsequent Mesopotamian civilization. Some scholars suggest that the Sumerians' expertise in irrigation directly enabled their technological innovations, providing surplus crops that supported specialized labor. craftsmen, scribes, and scholars, allowing intellectual and cultural achievements to flourish. Others propose that these systems also held a spiritual dimension, with canals and reservoirs woven into mythological and ritual landscapes, connecting the prosperity of the land to divine favor and the authority of kings and priests. Standing along a canal in your mind's eye, you can almost hear the quiet gurgle of water, the rhythmic pounding of shovels, the low murmur of officials dictating orders, the soft rustle of barley swaying in the breeze, and it becomes clear that control over this life-giving resource was inseparable from control over people, knowledge, and destiny itself. And yet, for all their ingenuity, these systems were fragile. Floods could devastate, silt could choke the channels, and disputes over water rights could ignite conflict, leaving the observer to ponder how did such a delicate balance sustain a civilization that would become the cradle of human achievement. And what lessons might its successes and failures whisper to us across the centuries? Now, let us turn our attention to the spiritual heartbeat of Sumerian society, their temples, ziggurats, and the divine narratives that echoed through the corridors of their cities. Imagine towering stepped pyramids, brick by sun-baked brick, rising from the flat plains like monumental stairways to the heavens, each level steeped in ritual significance, each chamber resonating with chants, prayers, and the faint aroma of incense. Some researchers believe that these structures were not merely religious centers but hubs of administration, economy, and knowledge, where priests, scribes, and artisans collaborated in a delicate dance of sacred and practical duties. Consider the ziggurat at Ur, its foundations dug deep into the earth, its summit a stage for offerings and celestial observations, where the boundary between the human and divine blurred in the morning light. The temples preserved vast libraries of clay tablets, containing myths, hymns, prayers, and legal codes, each etched symbol a fragment of a civilization attempting to understand itself and its place in the cosmos. Others suggest that the rituals performed here were not only acts of devotion but also methods of social cohesion, embedding the authority of kings and city-states within a framework of cosmic order. Walk through the imagined temple precincts, and you can sense the careful architecture of knowledge, scribes copying Sumerian texts, astronomers tracking the stars, priests reciting generations of inherited lore. The walls themselves, often inscribed with symbolic motifs, told stories of gods, kings, and the delicate balance between chaos and order. Archaeological excavations reveal that temple complexes functioned as microcosms of the wider city, with storage rooms filled with grain, workshops producing ceremonial objects, and courtyards echoing with the footsteps of those who maintained both earthly and spiritual order. The Sumerians believed that their prosperity, their harvests, and their very survival were bound to the favor of their gods. And thus the temples were not just monuments, but instruments of continuity and legitimacy. Even as political power fragmented and empires rose and fell, the temples maintained their influence, preserving language, literature, and ritual practices that would ripple into later Mesopotamian civilizations. And yet, amidst this grandeur, one cannot help but wonder how much of the Sumerian spirit captured in these sacred spaces and enduring texts was ever fully understood by those who came after, and what secrets might still lie buried beneath the dust of millennia, waiting to be rediscovered. As we move beyond the temples and ziggurats, we enter the realm of Sumerian innovation, where the practical and the intellectual intertwine to shape the very fabric of civilization. Picture vast networks of canals threading through marshy plains. The gentle murmur of flowing water punctuated by the clatter of clay shovels and the measured steps of laborers, coordinating an intricate irrigation system. Some researchers suggest that these early engineers transformed the unpredictable waters of the Tigris and Euphrates into lifelines for agriculture, enabling cities to flourish in an unforgiving environment. Others propose that the administration of such projects laid the foundation for bureaucracy itself, with records meticulously kept on clay tablets, recording labor contributions, resource allocations, and seasonal schedules. Imagine a bustling Sumerian marketplace, the hum of trade echoing against mud brick walls, merchants weighing barley, exchanging silver, and negotiating the shipment of pottery, metal tools, and textiles. Here, the seeds of commerce were not only sown but systematically organized, with contracts, partnership agreements, and standardized measurements providing structure to human interaction. The wheel, first seen in pottery and then transformed into vehicles, revolutionized transport and logistics, while bronze metallurgy, with its precise alloying and casting techniques, supplied tools and weapons that fueled both survival and expansion. Mathematics, once abstract and theoretical, became the backbone of administration, architecture, and astronomy. The sexagesimal system devised by Sumerians informed calendars, tracked celestial movements, and guided construction projects with precision that still amazes modern scholars. Some researchers believe that this blend of technical mastery and social organization created the conditions for cities like Ur, Uruk, and Lagash to become cultural powerhouses, each urban center a node in a vast network of knowledge and influence. Others suggest that Sumerian accomplishments in timekeeping, geometry, and record-keeping were less about immediate utility and more about asserting human control over chaos, a symbolic conquest of nature's unpredictability. As you imagine the scribes at work, their reeds scratching symbols onto clay tablets, you can sense the deliberate effort to impose order, to preserve knowledge across generations, to ensure that the lessons of today would endure in the centuries to come. And yet, despite all this mastery over water, stone, and the stars, one question lingers in the quiet recesses of history. What drove these people, so long ago, to invent systems so sophisticated, to build empires on the shifting sands of the floodplains, knowing that time itself would eventually claim their cities and their secrets? Finally, as we arrive at the culmination of the Sumerian story, we are drawn into the quiet resonance of legacy, the echo of a civilization whose influence stretches far beyond the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates. Sit back and imagine the twilight. Over Uruk, the sun casting long shadows across mud-brick streets, the air carrying the faint scent of baked clay and river silt, while inside the towering ziggurats, priests chant ancient hymns, their voices threading through time. Some researchers believe that the continuity of Sumerian knowledge, its writing, mathematics, legal systems, and religious concepts formed the invisible scaffolding upon which later Mesopotamian empires would rise, from Babylon to Assyria, and eventually ripple across the ancient world. Others suggest that the endurance of these innovations was not only practical but cultural, a testament to human ambition, curiosity, and the drive to leave something enduring behind. Imagine scholars copying Sumerian texts in dimly lit temple. Scriptoriums, their hands steady, eyes tracing lines that would inform generations of administrators, astronomers, and philosophers. These texts traveled, sometimes across deserts and rivers, finding homes in distant courts, influencing Hittites, Hurrians, and eventually Persian scribes, each encountering fragments of the Sumerian mind and adapting it to new contexts. Picture the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero wandering through wild landscapes. The story shaped first in Sumerian tongues, then translated, transformed, and spread, carrying with it reflections on mortality, friendship, and human ambition. Archaeological evidence shows that the very techniques of city building, irrigation, and metallurgy first perfected in Sumerian settlements informed civilizations thousands of years later, demonstrating a continuity that is both practical and profound. Even the modern world carries the fingerprints of Sumer, the 60-minute hour, the division of the circle into 360 degrees. Methods of law, commerce, and urban planning all echo back to this ancient ingenuity. And yet, for all the artifacts, tablets, and monumental ruins we have uncovered, so much remains shrouded in mystery. Who were the very first Sumerians, and how did their minds conceive systems so advanced in the chaos of the marshlands? How did their innovation spread, not through conquest alone, but through the quiet persistence of ideas? As the story of Sumer draws to a close, we are left with more questions than answers, a haunting reminder that the origins of civilization are layered, complex, and endlessly fascinating, inviting us to look deeper, to listen more closely, and to wonder at the ingenuity of a people who shaped the very foundations of human history.